They confirmed Mobius is never gonna say wow. So honestly, I stopped watching. Hello, everyone. What's going on? Welcome back to Pod Freak. This week we are going to be on episode 10, and we are going to be covering the third episode of the Loki series on Disney+. Obviously, going forward, spoilers if you have not seen the third episode of Loki on Disney+, starting in 3, 2, 1. I think this was my favorite episode that they have done thus far. Anybody who's ever heard me talk about works of fiction of any sort know that my main thing is character motivation, character development, what goes on inside their head, different things like that. And as part of that, I think the interactions we got between Loki and Sylvie, or as she was previously known, Lady Loki, were really good stuff and have presented a pretty good roadmap for where I think the series is going to go. But Tom Hiddleston said that he thought that episodes 4 and 5 took off in a way different direction than he was expecting when he originally read the script. So who knows? Because I would have to assume, include episode 3 when he, had an assumption over where episodes 4 and 5 would go. But first thing we should talk about, Lady Loki says she goes by Sylvie. I'm not looking this up because I try to give my thoughts on these cold, but I am 90% sure that is the name of the sorceress that a lot of people were predicting that Lady Loki would be, instead of actually being a Loki variant. Now, from the way that they have described it to us in this episode, she is still a Loki variant. She just doesn't like that name anymore. She doesn't want to go by Loki, and she chose Sylvie as a name for herself. So the question becomes, is she lying about being a Loki variant, and is she actually this enchantress or sorceress named Sylvie? Or has Marvel kind of consolidated two characters from the comic books into one arc in the films/TV shows? And is this just kind of like an Easter egg or a nod to that idea, combining elements of the two characters? My guess would be the latter, and the reason my guess would be the latter is because the way that she spoke in the episode did not necessarily sound as if she was someone making up stories about herself. Admittedly, she's kept a lot of things about her variant's history close to the chest and hasn't shared them with us yet. But just even the way that she made assumptions about the Loki variant that we know, sort of, you know what I mean, as close as it's going to get in this show at least, is even the references he made, about him being adopted, about what types of powers he has. It seemed as if they were coming from a perspective of someone with similar experiences. And I really do think this is going to be more of a situation where they have combined the lore of those two characters rather than her lying about who she is, though anything is possible. I just don't know why. I feel like if she were Sylvie, like the enchantress, and was pretending to be a Loki, she wouldn't have such a strong reaction to our Loki calling her Loki in the first place. If anything, she'd want to keep that lie going. So I definitely think that what's been presented to us in regards to her character is what it is. I don't know a lot about Sylvie from the comics. I've just heard people mention it in passing on TikTok, so I don't know what that can mean for her character arc or story. One thing that I did want to touch base on, and this is still open for interpretation, and there's a couple different things that Marvel could do to address this. But so with Loki and Lady Loki, it's a little bit easier because Loki is considered gender fluid. He's gender fluid in the comics. It'd probably be more accurate to say that he is sex fluid because he actually changes his physical embodiment, right? So it's not like out of line to say that, like, maybe I should explain where I'm coming from with this first. So I have a potential issue with the variants, at least the way they've been portrayed in memes and the way that we are being led to believe they'll be betrayed in the TV show based off of like slight references they've made thus far, but nothing explicit. And my issue is this. If the timekeepers have been keeping a quote-unquote perfect timeline and keeping everyone in order, making the exact right decisions at the right time to keep any branches from occurring, then how would the variants that we've seen of Loki, be it the ones in the hologram or Sylvie, how would they be so drastically different from the Loki we know? In theory, if the only Loki variant that has really been on the run as long as she has is Sylvie, then all of these other variants should very much just be the Tom Hiddleston we knew who took one step out of line and got arrested, right? Now, for the long term, stuff like bringing Fox or bringing the Sam Raimi Spider-Mans in and different things like that, I think that's completely feasible, because if the timeline really is exploded or destroyed by the end of this series, in theory, these timelines are going to be destroyed at multiple different parts throughout history, like Sylvie did in the last episode when she did the bombing. It wasn't all just to one portion of the timeline. It was different moments all throughout different times in history. So if that's the case, like clearly, like if one of those timeline branches from the bomb she dropped occurred in like 1892, then a lot of butterfly effects could happen to where on that timeline, if the TVA did not stop it in time, that there would be entirely different versions of the characters we know. If she bombed something in 1892, it could lead to a butterfly effect that leads to Tobey Maguire Spider-Man in the 2000s, right? As opposed to Tom Holland that we have in the MCU, that sort of thing. But based off of what we've been led to believe of the timeline thus far, amongst the variants that do exist in canon as we speak, there should not be a ton of variation really at all. And the thing with Lady Loki, Sylvie, we're actually going to touch on identity and preferred names as well, because I think it's a cool thing that the show has done. But the thing with Sylvie is that, in theory, one of two things could happen. Either I could be wrong and she really could not be a Loki variant. She could be this Enchantress, but I really don't think that's the case. Or B, she could have gone through so much since she's been on the run that she's become this entirely new person, right? Like maybe she was not choosing to project herself primarily as female when she originally faltered from the timeline that she was set on. So that in theory could work, depending on how long she's been on the run. But the other Loki variants they showed looked different too. And in theory, it really should just be the Loki that we've always known made one different decision and they cut him off, unless this is not the first time a Loki has been on the run as long as Sylvie has. But they really made it sound like it was. The second thing I want to deal with, I do want to deal with the idea of gender identity and LGBTQ representation in this show. I'll be completely honest up front. I am not the best person to come to when it comes to asking questions about LGBTQIA+, and their culture and different things like that. I am very separated from that culture. I am a straight, white, cisgender man, and as such, I don't have a lot of experience in that avenue. However, regardless of different lifestyles and different things that people hold important to them, I think it's incredibly important for minority representation to be shown in film and media, because it's kind of sad to imagine. I didn't shout out to I need to pull up their actual name on TikTok, because right now I just want to say their name is Bunky, and I think that's part of it, but that is not all of it, and I want to shout them out appropriately. I guess it is just Bunky. So shout out to Bunky with 3 Ys on TikTok. They explained the concepts of queer baiting that were going on in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and kind of put that type of representation in a way that really clicked with me for the first time, which is basically like, imagine going through your whole life and watching shows and never feeling like you saw yourself reflected in them and you were just watching like other people that you couldn't relate with. That would kind of suck, right? And then on top of that, there's also just like the ethical portions of it, as far as like, it's kind of unethical if, like, taking it out of sexuality and going into race, it's kind of unethical if, you know, X percentage of the American population is Hispanic or people of color, and like only one person on the cast is a minority, because that's not a realistic portrayal of real life. And at that point, like, people talk about forced minority, and I used to even feel that way in some regards, like, not like it made me mad, but like sometimes it did feel like people were pandering for the minority. But like when you flip the script and you think that, well, hey, if anything, they're actually forcing, not forced minority, forced diversity. If anything, they're actually forcing this all-white cast, because that's not a realistic portrayal of the people that are actually, who live in our country. It kind of brings a whole new light to it, because it's like, oh man, this isn't just like a subconscious like exclusion. This is more than likely a conscious choice by marketers with messed up worldviews, which is kind of sad. And I'm not making any accusations, but I'm sure that's happened at some point. The point is that there's also the ethical idea of having different people of different, who look different, who have different beliefs, who live their lives differently, being represented in media because they deserve to have their voices heard, and it's a realistic portrayal of the diverse world that we actually live in. So that whole diatribe, this is going to be a long episode. I'm kind of here for it, because I really wasn't looking forward to recording this when I sat down. I've kind of had a rough morning. In any case, it is awesome that the Loki show is dealing with this idea of, at the very least, confirmed bisexual Loki, bisexual Tom Hiddleston Loki, and seemingly the gender fluid identity of Loki that is existent in the comics as well, with Sylvie, and going one step further to talk about like respecting the identity that a person wants to be addressed as, by this person saying, I don't really identify as Loki anymore, I want to be called Sylvie, and putting that in the show. Because, you know, this month is Pride Month, and Pride Month is a very close to home subject for a lot of people, and a very important subject. And one thing that gets talked about is, a lot of times these big corporate companies, they will virtue signal and they will pander about things that they don't necessarily care about. And in that regard, sometimes it can come off unnatural or forced, or queer baiting, or just kind of throwing people a bone. And in the example of the Loki television show, I think that they've really hit it at a perfect time and done it in a perfect way, because this does not feel like a retcon. This is completely true to the Loki that is in the comics, and he is a big name character that people care about, rather than like the Russo brother, I forgot which one it was, but whichever Russo brother was in the support group in Endgame, you know, a throwaway character. This is real representation, depending on how far they want to run with it. And based off of how far they ran with it in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and based off of the fact that Loki is occurring in Pride Month, though I believe that, no, the next episode will come out on the 30th, so I'll still be in Pride Month. Not that it matters, but, you know, it started in Pride Month. They really could go a bit deeper with this. The question is, will they? And I really think they will. Disney is amazing at making movies, but one thing I've always believed about them, not always, but since I've been old enough to be observant, is Disney will do whatever they think is most profitable to them at the time, regardless of their moral convictions, right? They're going to listen to the culture. They are not the pioneer or the leader. They follow what they know will sell tickets the most, and they strike that balance as well as they can. They want to keep all of their audience happy. And as part of that, I do think that that would be something they would be interested in. And there's a lot of ways they could do it that would come off as that virtue signaling. But I think the Loki show is really the perfect opportunity. Like I said, it's true to his character in the comics. It doesn't come off as pandering or virtue signaling, and it is a real big character that people care about rather than a footnote to say, oh, hey, look, see, we did it. And in regards to Disney, I do think we're still at a point in our culture where, depending on how far they want to go with that, it really could be dangerous, because I don't know if we're at a point where you can make that big of a statement, and the culture will still, all be responsive to it. Like, I don't know if our culture is all at an accepting level at this point. And they absolutely should be. That's not what I'm trying to say. They absolutely should be at a level where they're accepting of that type of representation. But I don't think we are. And if Disney is still going forward with this anyway, then props to them. I guess we'll see how far they go with that in future episodes. But that's something I wanted to touch on because I think it's a big step, regardless of how you feel about it. It is a big step in media, and it's a big step for Disney. It's not the first time that representation like this has happened, but it may be one of the most prominent examples, depending on how far they actually go with it, or if it's not just a footnote in the dialogue. So we'll see, but I wouldn't be surprised if they go with that. That was a huge diversion. I talked about how I can't relate to this, and it's not really my place to say. And then I just blathered on for like 5 minutes about it. So I apologize. I'm really just trying to speak transparently, honestly, and respectfully. By all means, seriously, as long as you're nice and you're coming at it from a place of educating me, and not just like yelling at me or calling me awful, please, like, if I said anything that was inappropriate or incorrect or disrespectful, please hit me up on Twitter at ClockworthClone so that way I can understand more where that community is coming from and what's important to you guys. Because that's my thing is you don't have to be the same as someone else to want them to feel respected. And that's just something that I think everyone should follow. It'd be kind of good if we talked about the plot, huh? This really is going to be a longer episode. So the plot, I talked about how there was a good amount of progress between Loki and Sylvie, and how they're starting to connect a little bit. I had a conversation with a friend before the show started, where we were talking about how would Loki date himself when, the rumors about a lady Loki being in the show were going on. We're like, would Loki date himself? And the basic conclusion that I came to, at least, is Loki the character is absolutely vain enough to want to do that. And I think at the very least I thought like, oh, there'd be a joke in passing about, oh, you're me, you're so attractive, but like that would be like the end of it. I was like, I feel like Disney would not go the direction of having Loki actually pursue himself romantically, because it might get a little weird for people. But I absolutely, even if they don't go any further into LGBTQ stuff and like inclusiveness and identity, I think they are absolutely going to have a romantic tension between these two. And what's weird is it didn't come off as weird as I thought it would. And I guess we'll see what happens with that. All of this at this point is really just like predictions. This was a good episode that like built a lot of like plot to like work predictions off of, and that I think will get resolved over the next few episodes. But I really think they're going to go that direction, and it wasn't as weird as I thought it would be. At the very least, they have very great chemistry, which obviously Loki should have great chemistry with Sylvie, a variant of himself. But like Hiddleston and golly, what's her name? Let me see here. You'd think I'd know. Sylvie, Loki, Kate Herron. Kate Herron and Tom Hiddleston have amazing chemistry together. I think she's been fantastic as the part of Sylvie. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where they go with that. And then in regards to the other plot, I think the other big thing to talk about, and this will probably be our last topic, and we'll wrap it up from there, but is what exactly is going on with the TVA. There's been speculation, I talked about it a bit last week, is who we thought was just Lady Loki and we now know is Sylvie. Is she going to be the antagonist? Is the TVA going to be the antagonist? I stand by somewhat what I said last week. I said that my prediction would be that the TVA would most likely be the antagonist, but I didn't think that they were going to be like overtly evil. I thought maybe they had gotten so obsessed and led astray and different things like that. I'm starting to think that's not the case, given one very important new piece of plot information, which is that they are kidnapping and brainwashing variant humans from the timeline to be their soldiers and do their bidding against their will, which does lend a ton of credence to my idea that Mobius and Loki are still going to be good. They're still going to be tight. He is still a protagonist, even if the timekeepers of the TVA as a whole are not. I think the question becomes, and maybe this is where Tom Hiddleston talked about how he was really surprised at the direction they went in the last, in the 4th and 5th episode. I'm really excited for those episodes because of him saying that in that interview. But maybe the surprise will come not in the fact that the TVA are the bad people or, the antagonist. I like to use the term antagonist because antagonists are not always inherently bad guys, though I think this time they might be. But maybe the surprise will come not in the fact that the TVA are the antagonists, given that became pretty obvious, I think, in episode 3. I think the surprise might come in their motivations, their methods. If it's not about a timeline war, what is it actually about? And I'm really interested to get the answers to those questions. So not a ton of gushing this week, but I do think it was a good episode that established a lot of character development and a lot of important plot points. I'll be interested to see how they get off of the planet that they're on. I'm really, really hoping that the TVA shows up because they figured out where they were in a mad rush, and Mobius kind of muscles his way like, oh, I want to lead this charge, and his sympathy for the Lokis, Loki and Sylvie respectively, get the better of him, at the very least of our Loki, and he finds a way out of there for them. That's my prediction, and or at least my hope. I think this is a good stopping point. We're right at about 22 minutes, probably with the intro. This is a lot of fun this week. I felt like I had a good vibe going. As always, follow me on TikTok for video game content. Follow me on Twitter for bad opinions and general chit-chat, at ClockworthClone on both. No one's taken me up on it yet. If you are listening to the show, please hit me up at ClockworthClone. Continue the discussion so that I know people are listening and what they're thinking about it. Because without that, it can feel like I am just talking into the void. And lastly, obviously, you can follow me on YouTube or Instagram, also ClockworthClone. But those are just reposts from TikTok, and right now are rather dormant. Thank you so much for sticking around and listening. We're halfway through, guys, and I hope you have a great week.